Most people are still planning retirement around a number that quietly stopped working. Not because it was foolish, but because the world around it changed, slowly, then all at once. For decades, by the end of this video, you'll understand why two people with the same savings can retire years apart, and why one of them never needed the number they were chasing. The rule felt reassuring. Save enough so you can withdraw roughly 4% each year. Don't drain the principal too fast. Trust that markets will cooperate. That single idea powered an entire generation of retirement calculators. And here's the part that's uncomfortable to admit. If you follow that rule blindly today, you may be forcing yourself to work far longer than you actually need to. If that sentence made you defensive, don't skip ahead. That reaction is exactly why this matters. Pause for a moment. If that thought triggered resistance, good. That reaction matters. Because this isn't about taking reckless shortcuts, it's about understanding what actually makes retirement safe. Here's the contradiction most people never notice. Traditional retirement advice still assumes one fragile setup, one income source, one fixed withdrawal rate, one portfolio doing all the heavy lifting. Most people watching this aren't careless, they're responsible. They followed the rules, and that's why this problem hides in plain sight. Real life doesn't work that way. People retire with Social Security, sometimes a pension, often part-time income, lower taxes, and spending that usually declines after the early years. Yet we keep pretending every dollar must come from investments alone. That assumption quietly inflates the number you think you need. Let's translate what that really means. When someone says you need $1.5 million to retire safely, what they're actually saying is you must replace your entire lifestyle using portfolio withdrawals alone, forever. That's not conservative, it's unrealistic. And this is where the thinking begins to shift. Quick reset. If you stopped here, you'd walk away thinking retirement math is broken. It isn't. The assumption underneath it is. Because once you look at how money actually flows in and out of a retired household, the math doesn't collapse. It softens. Not magically, not irresponsibly, but measurably. In the next section, Milo Monkey is going to break down why the classic withdrawal rule exaggerates risk for most everyday retirees and why assumptions quietly fall apart once retirement actually begins. If this already nudged your thinking, tapping like helps this reach people still chasing an inflated number. Now let's look at what the old rule gets wrong and why fewer dollars can still mean more security. That big number comes from a fragile assumption that every year of retirement looks the same. On paper, the 4% rule assumes you retire, start withdrawing, and repeat that process for 30 straight years without adapting. Same spending, same risk, same behavior. Real retirees don't live like spreadsheets. Spending often peaks early. Travel, projects, helping family. Then it slows. Multiple studies show that real household spending typically declines after the first decade of retirement. Yet the old rule assumes maximum pressure forever. That mismatch matters. Here's another belief that quietly inflates the number. People assume investment withdrawals must cover everything, but most retirees don't live on portfolio income alone. Social Security doesn't show up clearly in calculators, but it shows up every single month in real life. If Social Security covers $2,000 a month, that's $24,000 a year your portfolio doesn't need to produce. At a 4% withdrawal rate, replacing that income would require roughly $600,000. That single number explains why so many people feel behind, even when they're not. Pause on that. That's not a tweak, that's a structural shift. And this is where the fear usually kicks in. But what about bad markets early in retirement? That's a fair question. And yes, sequence risk is real. But this is where the classic model breaks down again. It assumes retirees freeze, or panic, or refuse to adjust. Real people don't behave that way. They delay travel. They reduce withdrawals temporarily. They work part-time for a year or two. They pull from cash instead of stocks. Those small adjustments dramatically reduce failure risk without requiring millions more in savings. On paper, that looks messy. In real life, it's how humans survive uncertainty. And this leads to the key reframing. Retirement safety doesn't come from a single fixed percentage. It comes from flexibility. In the next part, Milo Monkey looks at updated data that models this flexibility and why newer withdrawal frameworks show lower required savings with higher real-world success. This is where math finally catches up with how people actually live. That flexibility isn't theory anymore, it's measurable. When researchers stopped modeling retirees like robots and started modeling human behavior, the results changed. Instead of a rigid 4% every single year, newer frameworks allow small adjustments. Spend a little less after bad years, resume after recoveries. Let guaranteed income do part of the work. Failure rates dropped, not because markets became safer, but because the model became more human. Here's a concrete example. Imagine a household that needs $60,000 a year to live comfortably. Social Security covers $25,000. Now the portfolio only needs to produce $35,000. At a conservative 3.5% withdrawal rate, that requires roughly $1 million. Under the old framing, the same household might target 1.7 to 2 million. Same lifestyle, same person, different assumptions. That gap isn't safety, it's overinsurance. And here's the psychological turn most people miss. When the number feels unreachable, behavior deteriorates. People delay retirement unnecessarily. They oversave but underlive. They treat money as something to defend, not use. Ironically, that stress often leads to worse decisions later in life. But when the target feels achievable, behavior improves. People plan. They stay flexible. They adjust intentionally instead of emotionally. This is where retirement stops feeling like a cliff and starts feeling like a range. Bad years are managed, not feared. Good years rebuild margins. Income sources work together instead of competing. The old rule trained people to ask, what's the safest number? The better question is, what system survives uncertainty? And systems don't rely on one fragile lever. They rely on buffers, choices, time. In the final section, Milo Monkey brings this together because what matters most isn't hitting a perfect number, it's building resilience. Retirement doesn't fail because the number was imperfect. It fails when the system has no room to breathe. A rigid plan breaks under pressure. A flexible one bends. And this is the uncomfortable truth. You don't retire safely by guessing the perfect withdrawal rate. You retire safely by building a structure that can absorb bad years without panic. That structure usually includes guaranteed income covering the basics, a portfolio sized to supplement, not replace, and the willingness to adjust briefly and intentionally. When those pieces work together, the amount of money required drops, not because risk disappears, but because risk is shared. This is why many retirees with less than they were told they needed do just fine. They're not reckless, they're adaptive. They understand retirement isn't a single decision made on day one. It's a long sequence of small choices. And once you see that, the question changes. It stops being, am I rich enough to retire? And becomes, is my system strong enough to adjust? That's a far more realistic test, and it's one most people can pass years earlier than they think. If this reframed how you think about safe withdrawals and retirement math, subscribing helps Milo Monkey keep sharing clarity without noise or hype. Because real wealth isn't loud, It doesn't demand precision. It survives by staying flexible. And the quiet relief of realizing you may need less than you feared, that isn't false hope. That's what happens when the math finally matches real life.